Emily Henderson looked like the kind of mother every neighbor admired, but when hidden cameras inside her own home began recording at night, they exposed a secret so horrifying it would turn the perfect family image into a scene of unimaginable terror. Emily Henderson's life appeared to be the definition of perfection. To anyone watching from the outside, she was a devoted wife, a loving mother, and a friendly neighbor. Her two-story home on Willow Creek Drive was always neat, the flower beds bursting with color, the white picket fence freshly painted. Every morning she sent her children off to school with a wave, a smile that seemed genuine, and a lunchbox packed with care. Her husband, David, admired her dedication. She seemed to manage everything flawlessly: meals, housework, even volunteering at the local community center. But behind the pristine curtains and the pleasant greetings, something far darker was beginning to unfold. The first sign that something was off came one ordinary Thursday. David had stayed up late working on a project in his office when he heard footsteps downstairs. He assumed it was Emily, maybe grabbing a glass of water, but the sound lingered, slow and deliberate. When he went to check, the kitchen lights were off, and everything looked untouched. He brushed it off as his imagination. The following morning, the refrigerator door was wide open. Milk spilled across the floor. Emily blamed one of the kids, though both swore they hadn't been in the kitchen. Over the next few days, other strange things started happening. The back door would be unlocked in the mornings, even though David remembered locking it before bed. The family cat, Milo, began refusing to go near the basement door, hissing whenever it was opened. There was also the faint smell of bleach in the air at odd hours, though Emily claimed she was just keeping the house extra clean. David wanted to believe her. After all, she had always been meticulous about cleanliness, but there was something about her expression when she said it, something distant and cold that unsettled him. One night, while Emily slept soundly beside him, David decided to check the kitchen again. This time, he noticed the faint glow of the refrigerator light spilling across the tiles. He crept downstairs quietly and stopped halfway when he saw Emily standing there. She wasn't moving, just staring into the open refrigerator. Her face was blank, her eyes fixed on something inside. After a few moments, she closed the door, turned off the light, and walked back upstairs, her movements smooth and mechanical. The next morning, she acted as if nothing had happened. She hummed while packing the kids' lunches, kissed David on the cheek, and reminded him to pick up groceries after work. He wanted to ask her about the night before, but couldn't bring himself to. Maybe she was sleepwalking. Maybe the stress of raising two children had finally taken its toll. Yet deep down, David couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that something else was going on, something he couldn't see. When Milo vanished a few days later, David decided to take action. He bought a set of home security cameras and installed them throughout the house, one in the kitchen, one in the living room, and one facing the basement door. He told Emily it was for safety, but he had another reason. He needed to know what was happening when no one else was watching. When the cameras were finally installed, David felt a strange sense of relief. He told himself that within a few days he would have proof that nothing unusual was happening, that all the oddities could be explained by stress or coincidence. For the first few nights, the footage showed nothing out of the ordinary. The kids played in the living room, Emily folded laundry, the dog barked at shadows outside the window. Everything looked perfectly normal, almost comforting. Then, on the fourth night, the recordings took a turn that left David unable to sleep. He sat at his desk after midnight, scrolling through the footage. The kitchen camera caught Emily walking into the room at 2:13 a.m. She moved slowly, her posture rigid. She opened the refrigerator door and stood still for nearly 5 minutes, her face hidden by the bright white light. Then she reached into the freezer and pulled out something wrapped in foil. Her movements were steady, almost ritualistic. She placed it in the sink, turned on the tap, and began washing it with deliberate care. As the water ran, David noticed red swirling down the drain. His first thought was that it must be a piece of meat, maybe something for dinner the next day. But when she unwrapped it, the shape didn't look right. It was too small, too delicate. She stood there, washing it until the water turned clear, before wrapping it back up and returning it to the freezer. The next morning, Emily seemed cheerful, humming as she cooked breakfast. David couldn't bring himself to mention what he'd seen. Instead, he told her he was heading to work early, but he stayed in his car for nearly an hour, watching the footage again and again. Each time, he convinced himself it had to be something harmless, yet the image of that small, pale shape wouldn't leave his mind. That evening, he added 2 more cameras, one in the basement, another in the garage. He told Emily the old system wasn't working properly and that he wanted full coverage for security. She didn't question him. She only nodded, smiling faintly, as if she already knew what he was doing. Over the next few nights, nothing happened. Then, one Friday just after midnight, the basement camera came to life. The motion sensor caught Emily entering the room carrying a bundle wrapped in a towel. She laid it carefully on the workbench and began mixing liquids from unlabeled bottles. The scene was silent except for the faint clinking of glass. David leaned closer to the monitor, his heart pounding. The towel moved slightly as she worked, and for a moment he thought he saw something twitch beneath it. By the time she finished, she cleaned the table, packed everything into a box, and left. David rushed downstairs seconds later, but when he reached the basement, it was spotless. There was no box, no towel, no smell, no sign she'd been there at all. When he checked the footage again, the file was gone, deleted. His stomach sank. Only Emily had the password to access the system. David began losing sleep. Every night he stayed awake long after Emily and the children had gone to bed, staring at the dark monitor screens as if waiting for something to happen. He barely ate, barely spoke, his mind consumed with the question of what his wife was hiding. The missing footage haunted him more than anything. If she truly had nothing to conceal, why erase it? The idea that someone could move through the same rooms, smile the same smile, and hide such disturbing secrets made his stomach turn. He began to notice little things that he had overlooked before. Tiny smudges on the basement door handle, faint scratches near the floorboards, and the sound of the washing machine running at impossible hours. He decided to replace the deleted hard drive with a new one that Emily didn't know about. This time, the recordings would back up automatically to a hidden cloud account under his own email. He placed the cameras carefully so that even if she checked the system, she wouldn't see the small backup devices he had added. That night, for the first time in days, he felt like he might finally get the truth. The following morning, he left for work as usual but couldn't focus on anything. He thought of the basement constantly. When he got home, he told Emily he was feeling sick and went straight upstairs. As soon as she went to bed, he opened his laptop and pulled up the new footage. Around midnight, the basement camera activated again. Emily appeared, dressed in her nightgown, her expression completely empty. She was carrying a black plastic bag that looked heavy. She placed it on the workbench and began opening it. Out came several small objects, wooden boxes, jars filled with cloudy liquid, and what looked like old toys. She arranged them neatly, almost tenderly. Then she brought out a small doll, dressed in a child's shirt. At first, David thought it was another toy, but as she brushed its hair, something inside him went cold. The limbs were too real. The skin had a texture that no plastic could imitate. Emily began humming softly as she reached for a jar and dipped a brush into the liquid, coating the doll's face with slow, careful strokes. The image was horrifying, yet mesmerizing. She looked calm, almost peaceful, like an artist working on her masterpiece. After a while, she wrapped everything back in the towel, cleaned the table spotless, and turned off the light. The camera switched to infrared as she left the room. When David checked the basement in the morning, everything was gone again. No jars, no towels, no boxes. Only the faint smell of ammonia lingered in the air. That night, he reviewed the footage once more, only to find the same clip missing again. Somehow she had accessed the files and erased them, even though he had changed every password. That realization filled him with dread. She knew what he was doing, and she was letting him watch, just enough to make him understand that she was always one step ahead. The days that followed were unbearable. The house no longer felt like a home, but a place filled with quiet dread. David moved through the rooms carefully, his mind clouded by fear and disbelief. He couldn't confront Emily, not yet. Every time he looked at her, she was calm and cheerful, moving through her routines as if nothing had changed. She prepared breakfast, reminded the kids to do their homework, folded laundry in front of the television. But behind her gentle voice, David saw something different now, something detached and cold. He began to avoid her gaze, unable to stand the thought of what those same hands might have done in the dark. One rainy morning, their son Oliver stayed home from school with a fever. Emily insisted on taking care of him while David went to work. He hesitated, glancing toward the basement door as he left, but forced himself to trust that nothing would happen in broad daylight. By afternoon, the rain had turned into a storm, and when he came home that evening, the house was unusually quiet. Emily sat at the dining table with a cup of tea, smiling faintly. She said Oliver had gone to bed early and was resting peacefully. David nodded, pretending to believe her, but when he went upstairs to check, the bed was empty. The covers were untouched. His heart began to race as he searched every room, calling his son's name. Emily stood at the foot of the stairs, her expression unreadable. She told him not to worry, that Oliver had probably gone to play in the garage. David ran outside, shouting into the rain, but there was no sign of him. The police arrived within the hour, and the search began immediately. Neighbors joined in, flashlights cutting through the darkness as they combed the yards and nearby woods. Emily sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket, staring at the ground while officers asked her questions she barely answered. When detectives requested access to the home security footage, David handed them everything he had. He explained about the deleted files, the strange behavior, the hidden cameras. They retrieved the cloud backups he had forgotten to check that day. It took hours to process, but eventually one of the officers called him into the living room. On the screen, the latest recording played, the one from that very morning. Emily was seen leading Oliver down to the basement. He was holding a blanket, rubbing his eyes, clearly half asleep. She guided him gently, almost lovingly, down the steps. The footage continued for several minutes, showing her closing the door behind them. Then the camera flickered once, twice, and went dark. When the officers searched the basement again, they found fresh cement spread unevenly across one corner of the floor. Tools were neatly stacked nearby, and the air carried a faint chemical smell. Emily didn't resist when they took her away. She simply stood, straightened her sweater, and walked out into the rain without a word. David followed in silence, his world collapsing around him as he realized the woman he had shared his life with was capable of something he could never comprehend. The basement was sealed off for days as forensic teams worked in silence. The sound of digging echoed through the house, a steady rhythm that made David sick each time he heard it. He sat in the living room with his head in his hands, unable to process the reality around him. Emily had confessed nothing. She remained calm even during questioning, her voice steady and emotionless. When asked about Oliver, she simply said he was safe, offering no further explanation. That phrase replayed in David's mind until it twisted into something unbearable. He clung to a small piece of hope that maybe she had hidden him somewhere, that maybe this nightmare still had a way out. But by the third day, hope was gone. The investigators found a hollow section beneath the concrete floor, concealed by a false layer that blended perfectly with the rest of the foundation. Inside were several sealed plastic bags, each labeled with dates written in careful handwriting. What they discovered inside shattered the illusion of Emily Henderson's perfect life forever. The remains were not just Oliver S. They belonged to 3 other children who had disappeared from nearby towns over the past 5 years. Each had been reported missing without leads, each case left unsolved until now. The evidence pointed to a long, calculated pattern. Emily had volunteered at local schools, offering to help with after-school programs, gaining the trust of parents and teachers. Investigators uncovered dozens of photos of children on her phone, each marked with notes and times. She had studied them, planned her moves, and found opportunities when no one was watching. It was a level of deception that chilled everyone involved. She had hidden her darkness so well that even those closest to her never suspected. David was interviewed repeatedly, his statements growing weaker each time. He told the detectives everything about the strange nights, the deleted footage, the unsettling behavior, but it was clear to them that he had been as much a victim as anyone else. The hardest part for him was realizing that the signs had been there all along, small cracks in the perfect picture he had chosen to ignore. When the police finally released their report, the details horrified the entire community. Emily had not acted out of rage or desperation. Her actions were deliberate, methodical, almost ritualistic. She had preserved items belonging to each child, clothing, toys, locks of hair, and stored them in the jars found in the basement. Experts described her as emotionally detached, living 2 lives so convincingly that no one could tell where the lie ended. The day she was sentenced, the courtroom was filled with silence. Emily stood without expression, her gaze fixed forward as the judge read the verdict. There were no tears, no visible remorse. David couldn't bear to look at her. He left before the hearing was over, unable to stay in the same room with the woman who had destroyed everything. The house on Willow Creek Drive was later sold, its windows boarded and yard overgrown, a quiet reminder that sometimes the most terrifying monsters live behind the calmest smiles.